The streets of New York City stretched endlessly under a grey November sky, where the metallic echo of police sirens mixed with the constant hum of traffic on Fifth Avenue. Rex, a 4-year-old German shepherd with a dark coat and piercing amber eyes, had earned his reputation as the most formidable K9 in the NYPD's elite K9 unit. His record spoke for itself. 37 successful suspect apprehensions, 12 narcotics busts, and countless tracking operations that ended with criminals behind bars. Officers throughout the department knew his name, and suspects who encountered him rarely attempted escape a second time. But Rex carried a darker legacy that no one could ignore. During training sessions at the precinct's outdoor facility in Queens, experienced handlers approached him with visible hesitation, their movements calculated and tense. Sergeant Tom Bradley, a 20-year veteran with the K9 unit, had tried everything from positive reinforcement to advanced obedience protocols developed by specialized trainers across the country, but Rex remained unpredictable and dangerously independent. The dog obeyed commands during operations with mechanical precision, executing searches and apprehensions with textbook accuracy, yet he never formed the crucial bond that made K9 teams truly effective. Other dogs in the unit displayed loyalty and affection toward their handlers, tails wagging during downtime, seeking physical contact and approval. Rex showed none of these behaviors. He performed his duties like a soldier, following orders from a commanding officer he neither trusted nor respected. The breaking point came on a cold Tuesday evening during a drug raid in the Bronx, an operation that should have been routine for a K9 with Rex's experience and training. The target was a suspected methamphetamine lab operating in a deteriorating warehouse near the Harlem River, a building that had been abandoned by legitimate businesses years ago and now served as a hub for criminal enterprise. Intelligence suggested that the operation inside produced hundreds of thousands in product each month, distributed throughout the 5 boroughs and into New Jersey. The tactical team assembled at 1700 hours, reviewing floor plans and establishing entry protocols, while Rex waited in his transport vehicle, alert and coiled like a spring, waiting for release. When the team breached the warehouse entrance at 1830, Rex moved through the building with Lieutenant James Kowalski, his temporary handler for the operation. The interior was a maze of makeshift walls constructed from plywood and shipping pallets, with harsh fluorescent lights illuminating cooking stations that reeked of chemical precursors. Rex's trained nose detected traces immediately, leading Kowalski through narrow corridors toward the primary production area. The raid proceeded smoothly until a suspect emerged from a hidden room in the warehouse's eastern corner, wielding a length of metal pipe and clearly intoxicated or high on his own product. His eyes were wild, his movements erratic, and he swung the pipe toward Kowalski without warning or hesitation. Rex responded instantaneously, launching himself at the threat with such explosive force that both the suspect and the dog crashed into the plywood wall behind them. But unlike his previous apprehensions, Rex didn't release when the threat was neutralized. Even after the pipe clattered across the concrete floor and the suspect screamed for mercy, Rex maintained his attack with terrifying intensity. Kowalski shouted commands that the dog ignored completely, and 2 other officers rushed to the scene, pulling at Rex's collar and body with all their strength. It took 3 grown men nearly 40 seconds to separate the K9 from the suspect, and by that time the damage was severe. The suspect required 17 stitches across his forearm and shoulder, suffered a fractured wrist, and filed a formal complaint with Internal Affairs before he was even transported from the hospital to booking. Captain Sarah Mitchell, head of the K9 division for the past 6 years, sat in her office the following morning reviewing incident reports and body camera footage from the warehouse raid. She had commanded K9 units through hundreds of operations, managed dozens of dogs with various temperaments and specializations, and trained personally with some of the best handlers in the country. But Rex represented a problem she couldn't solve through conventional methods. The footage showed clearly that the suspect had been disarmed and subdued within seconds of Rex's initial contact. Yet the dog continued attacking with what the internal affairs investigator described as excessive and uncontrolled aggression inconsistent with proper K9 protocol. Mitchell knew what recommendation the investigator would make. Retire Rex from active duty immediately, before the department faced a lawsuit it couldn't defend, or, worse, before the dog seriously injured or terminated a suspect during a future operation. That afternoon, Mitchell walked through the precinct's K9 facility, a converted warehouse in Long Island City that housed 12 dogs and their handlers. The space featured indoor training areas, climate-controlled kennels, and an outdoor yard where dogs could exercise and practice tactical drills. Rex occupied the largest kennel in the facility's northwest corner, separated from the other K9s because his aggressive behavior extended beyond humans to include other animals. Mitchell stood outside his enclosure, watching as Rex paced along the chain-link fence, his powerful muscles rippling beneath his dark coat. The dog's amber eyes met hers briefly before looking away, scanning the facility with the hypervigilance of an animal that expected threats from every direction. Sergeant Bradley joined Mitchell at the kennel, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the break room and wearing the exhausted expression of someone who had spent months trying to solve an impossible problem. He had worked with Rex since the dog completed initial K9 training 18 months ago, and he had documented every behavioral intervention, every training modification, every attempt to establish the partnership that should have formed naturally between handler and K9. Nothing worked. Rex performed his duties effectively when deployed, but he operated independently, following commands only when they aligned with his own assessment of the tactical situation. Bradley had consulted with veterinary behaviorists, law enforcement K9 experts from other jurisdictions, and even specialists who worked with military working dogs suffering from trauma and stress disorders. Every evaluation reached the same conclusion. Rex possessed exceptional intelligence and tactical ability, but something fundamental was broken in his capacity for trust. Mitchell sipped her coffee and asked the question that had been weighing on her mind since reviewing the incident reports. Was there any scenario, any possible intervention that could rehabilitate Rex before the department made the official decision to retire him? Bradley hesitated before answering, his eyes still fixed on the dog, pacing inside the kennel. He admitted that he didn't know, that every conventional approach had failed, and that continuing to deploy Rex in his current condition represented an unacceptable liability for the department and the officers working alongside him. But retiring a K9 as young and capable as Rex felt like admitting defeat, like acknowledging that some problems couldn't be solved, no matter how much expertise and resources were applied to them. That night, as Rex sat alone in his kennel after the facility's lights had been dimmed for evening rest period, the fluorescent emergency lighting cast harsh shadows across the concrete floor. The other K9s had settled into their sleeping areas, some snoring softly, while others shifted occasionally in their rest. But Rex remained alert, sitting upright near the front of his enclosure, with his ears rotating to track every sound in the building. No one who observed him could have predicted that his fate would soon intertwine with the city's most notorious organized crime figure, or that the solution to his behavioral crisis would come from someone whose entire life had been built on violence, manipulation, and the careful management of fear. The dog's amber eyes reflected something beyond aggression in the dim light, a deep, fundamental mistrust that years of professional training had failed to overcome. Rex had been trained to protect and serve, conditioned through thousands of hours of practice and deployment to detect threats and neutralize dangers. But he had never learned to trust the humans who commanded him, and without that trust, he would forever remain what every handler feared: a weapon without a partnership, effective but ultimately uncontrollable, destined for retirement before his prime, or worse, for a tragic incident that would end his career and possibly someone's life in a single catastrophic moment of uncontrolled violence. The Federal Plaza building in Lower Manhattan bustled with activity on a Wednesday morning in late November, its 37 floors housing offices for the FBI, Secret Service, and various other federal law enforcement agencies responsible for maintaining order in one of the world's most complex urban environments. On the 14th floor, in a secured wing requiring multiple levels of clearance to access, Special Agent Daniel Reeves prepared for what would be one of the most significant interviews of his career with the FBI's Organized Crime Task Force. Salvatore Greco, a 62-year-old patriarch of one of New York's 5 major crime families, had agreed to cooperate with federal prosecutors in exchange for witness protection and reduced sentences for his 2 sons, both facing racketeering charges that carried potential life sentences. Greco arrived at Federal Plaza in an unmarked vehicle at 0900 hours, escorted by 4 U.S. Marshals who had maintained custody since his arrest 3 weeks earlier. He wore a tailored charcoal suit that spoke to decades of wealth accumulated through enterprises that spanned construction, waste management, labor unions, and ventures that federal indictments described with clinical precision: extortion, money laundering, illegal gambling, and conspiracy to commit murder. His silver hair was neatly combed, his weathered hands folded calmly in his lap as the marshals processed him through security checkpoints and biometric scanners. Greco's demeanor suggested a man who had made peace with his circumstances, who understood that cooperation represented not betrayal, but rather cold mathematics, a calculated decision to preserve his bloodline, even if it meant dismantling the empire he had spent 5 decades building. The interrogation room where Agent Reeves waited was deliberately austere. Metal table, 4 chairs, recording equipment mounted discreetly in the ceiling corners, and reinforced glass windows that looked out onto the Manhattan skyline stretching toward the East River. Reeves had spent the previous 2 weeks reviewing Greco's file, which contained thousands of pages documenting surveillance operations, wiretap transcripts, financial records, and testimony from lower-level associates who had already accepted plea agreements. The file painted a portrait of a man who had risen through organized crime's ranks, not through violence alone, though he had certainly authorized and participated in plenty, but through strategic thinking and an ability to navigate the complex politics of families competing for territory and influence across the tri-state area. Greco entered the room at 09:15 and took a seat across from Reeves without being directed, his movements economical and controlled. The marshals positioned themselves near the door, their presence a reminder that despite the cooperative atmosphere, Greco remained a federal prisoner whose freedom depended entirely on the value of information he provided. Reeves opened a folder and laid out surveillance photos across the metal table, each image documenting meetings, cash exchanges, and the infrastructure of an empire that had operated for generations. The photos showed Greco at construction sites in Queens, waste management facilities in New Jersey, union halls in Brooklyn, and restaurants throughout Little Italy, where business was conducted over espresso and pastries, while armed associates maintained security outside. The interrogation stretched into its 2nd hour as Reeves methodically worked through the organizational structure of the Greco crime family, documenting chains of command, financial flows, and the specific roles played by various associates and captains. Greco answered questions with careful precision, providing details that demonstrated his cooperation while avoiding unnecessary embellishment or dramatics. He understood that federal prosecutors needed actionable intelligence that could survive courtroom scrutiny, not entertaining stories about the old days. When Reeves asked about specific acts of violence, contract killings, beatings, intimidation campaigns, Greco's responses became more measured, acknowledging organizational decisions while carefully framing his own involvement in ways that might minimize his criminal exposure despite the cooperation agreement. By 1100 hours, both men needed a break. Reeves stepped into the hallway to consult with Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Walsh, who had been monitoring the interview from an adjacent room. Walsh expressed satisfaction with Greco's level of detail and candor, noting that his testimony would be crucial for indictments targeting the remaining family leadership. The cooperation agreement protected Greco's sons from the most serious charges, but it required him to testify in multiple trials and provide ongoing intelligence about criminal operations that extended beyond his immediate family. In exchange, he would enter the witness protection program with a new identity, relocation to an undisclosed location, and federal monitoring for the remainder of his life. It was during this mid-morning break that Captain Sarah Mitchell arrived at Federal Plaza with Rex, having been requested to bring the K-9 for a narcotics sweep of evidence lockers on the building's 12th floor. The FBI periodically requested K-9 assistance from the NYPD for specialized searches, particularly when processing large quantities of seized materials that might contain hidden contraband. Mitchell kept Rex on a short lead as they cleared security and entered the elevator, the dog's muscles tense and his attention fixed on every person and sound in the building's busy lobby. Rex's behavior in unfamiliar environments was always heightened, his natural suspicion amplified by the crowds and multiple potential threats that his training had conditioned him to assess continuously. The elevator stopped on the 14th floor to allow several FBI agents to exit, and Mitchell held Rex close to prevent any incidents in the confined space. As the doors opened, she observed U.S. Marshals positioned in the hallway outside what appeared to be an interview room, their tactical posture suggesting they were securing someone significant. Mitchell didn't know who was being held in that room, didn't know that the man inside represented one of organized crime's most powerful figures, but Rex reacted to something she couldn't perceive. The dog's ears rotated forward, his body language shifting from controlled tension to focused attention, directed at the closed door where Greco was taking a brief respite before the interrogation resumed. One of the marshals, a veteran agent named Marcus Thompson, who had worked witness protection details for 15 years, noticed the K-9's attention and asked Mitchell if the dog had detected something. She explained that she was there for an evidence sweep on the 12th floor and that Rex sometimes reacted to unfamiliar environments unpredictably. Thompson nodded, but kept watching the dog, whose gaze remained fixed on the interview room door. When Agent Reeves emerged moments later to retrieve additional files from his office, Rex's posture changed again, ears back, low growl building in his throat, the warning behavior that Mitchell had come to recognize as Rex's response to perceived threats. Reeves paused, experienced enough in law enforcement to recognize when a K-9 was displaying aggression. Mitchell tightened her grip on the lead and spoke a calm command that Rex obeyed mechanically, the growling stopping but his body remaining tense and coiled. Reeves asked if the dog was safe, and Mitchell assured him that Rex was under control while internally calculating how quickly she could move to the stairwell if the situation escalated. But then Salvatore Greco himself emerged from the interview room, escorted by 2 marshals and moving toward the men's room 20 feet down the hallway. The moment Greco came into Rex's line of sight, everything changed in a way that defied every pattern Mitchell had observed during 18 months working with the troubled K-9. Rex's entire posture transformed instantaneously. His tail lowered into a neutral position, his breathing steadied and deepened, his ears rotated forward in an expression of curiosity rather than threat, and he made direct eye contact with the mobster without displaying any signs of aggression or fear. The change was so dramatic and unexpected that Mitchell loosened her grip on the lead slightly, uncertain whether she was witnessing a behavioral anomaly or the precursor to an attack. Greco paused in the hallway, reading the animal's body language with an understanding that seemed incongruous with his background and reputation. The marshals tensed, hands moving instinctively toward their weapons, but Greco raised one hand slightly in a gesture that communicated calm. The mobster extended his other hand slowly, palm down and fingers relaxed, allowing Rex to process his scent without making any threatening movements or direct approaches. This was proper technique for interacting with an unfamiliar dog, the kind of knowledge that suggested experience beyond casual pet ownership. Rex moved forward voluntarily, Mitchell's lead going slack as the dog closed the distance between himself and Greco with deliberate, controlled steps. The K9 pressed his muzzle briefly against Greco's extended fingers, processing scent and temperature and whatever other information his heightened senses gathered from that momentary contact, before returning to a sitting position directly in front of the mobster. Captain Mitchell stood frozen in the hallway, her mind struggling to process what she had just witnessed. In 23 years working with police dogs, including deployments in high-stress tactical environments and countless training scenarios, she had never observed Rex voluntarily approach anyone with curiosity and calm. The dog's behavioral patterns were extensively documented. Aggression towards strangers, hypervigilance in unfamiliar environments, refusal to accept physical contact from anyone, except during necessary veterinary care or equipment fitting. Yet here he sat, relaxed and attentive, focused entirely on a man whose criminal history included allegations of ordering multiple contract killings and overseeing violent enforcement operations across New York's organized crime landscape. Agent Reeves exchanged glances with the marshals, all of them recognizing that they had just observed something extraordinary and inexplicable. Marshal Thompson had worked with K9 units during his earlier career with the Secret Service, and he understood enough about police dog behavior to know that what he had just witnessed contradicted everything about Rex's documented temperament. Greco himself smiled faintly, not with triumph or manipulation, but with the quiet recognition that sometimes passed between beings who understood brokenness because they had spent lifetimes either breaking or being broken. As the marshals escorted him toward the men's room to complete his break before returning to the interrogation, Greco looked back once at the dog sitting calmly in Mitchell's loosened lead. Rex watched until the mobster disappeared around the corner, and for the first time since joining the NYPD K9 unit 18 months ago, the untamable police dog appeared uncertain about where his instincts were directing him. Mitchell gently tugged the lead to continue toward the elevator and their original assignment on the 12th floor, and Rex followed obediently. But something fundamental had shifted in those brief moments of contact. Captain Mitchell didn't yet know how that encounter would change everything, didn't know that federal prosecutors and NYPD leadership would soon propose an arrangement so unconventional that it would be discussed in hushed tones and classified memos, didn't know that the solution to Rex's behavioral crisis would come from a man whose entire existence represented everything law enforcement fought against. But as she completed the evidence sweep, and loaded Rex back into her vehicle for the return to the precinct, Mitchell couldn't stop replaying those moments in the Federal Plaza hallway. Couldn't stop wondering what Salvatore Greco possessed that every certified K9 trainer and behavioral specialist in the department had lacked. 3 weeks after that initial encounter at Federal Plaza, An arrangement took shape that defied conventional protocols and required approvals from the highest levels of both the FBI and NYPD leadership. Deputy Chief Marcus Torres convened a classified meeting in his office at One Police Plaza, attended by Captain Sarah Mitchell, Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Walsh, FBI Special Agent Daniel Reeves, and U.S. Marshal Thompson. The proposal that Walsh presented seemed absurd on its surface. Allow Salvatore Greco, currently cooperating with federal authorities under a plea agreement, to work with Rex under supervised conditions to determine whether the mobster's apparent connection with the troubled K9 could achieve what months of professional training had failed to accomplish. Mitchell objected immediately and forcefully. The idea of placing NYPD's most behaviorally unstable police dog under the guidance of an organized crime figure, even one cooperating with federal authorities, represented an unacceptable breach of department protocols and common sense. She argued that Rex's behavioral issues required intervention from certified professionals with documented expertise in canine psychology and law enforcement canine training, not from a criminal whose cooperation agreement didn't suddenly transform him into a qualified handler. Deputy Chief Torres shared Mitchell's concerns, but faced practical realities that narrowed his options considerably. Internal Affairs had recommended Rex's immediate retirement following the warehouse incident, and the department's legal counsel had warned that continuing to deploy the dog without addressing his aggression issues exposed the city to significant liability. Agent Reeves presented the federal perspective, explaining that Greco would remain in custody regardless of whether he participated in the K9 rehabilitation program. The cooperation agreement required him to remain available for ongoing debriefings and testimony preparation for trials that wouldn't commence for at least 6 months. During that interim period, Greco would be housed in a federal detention facility, or if he participated in the K9 program, in a secured location where his activities could be monitored while keeping him productive and engaged. Marshal Thompson added that witness protection candidates who remained idle during lengthy cooperation periods often experienced psychological deterioration that made them less effective witnesses, and that providing Greco with meaningful work might actually serve federal interests by maintaining his mental stability and cooperation. The meeting lasted 3 hours, with arguments cycling through legal considerations, operational security concerns, and the underlying question of whether the entire proposal represented creative problem-solving or institutional recklessness. Ultimately, Deputy Chief Torres approved a 60-day trial period with extensive conditions and monitoring protocols. Greco would work with Rex at a secured facility under constant U.S. Marshal supervision, with Captain Mitchell present during every session to document techniques and assess progress. If Rex showed meaningful behavioral improvement, the program would continue and potentially provide a model for rehabilitating other troubled K9s. If the arrangement failed or created new problems, it would be terminated immediately, and Greco would return to standard federal custody while Rex faced retirement. The facility selected for the program occupied a converted warehouse in Staten Island, located in an industrial area near the Arthur Kill Waterway with minimal civilian foot traffic and excellent security characteristics. The building had previously served as a training center for private security contractors before being acquired by the federal government for law enforcement purposes. Its interior had been divided into training zones that simulated urban environments. Alleyways constructed from movable concrete barriers, mock apartment entrances complete with doors and windows, open spaces marked with scent detection stations, and observation areas where Mitchell and the marshals could monitor sessions without interfering. The facility's isolation meant that word of the unconventional arrangement wouldn't leak to media outlets or police unions that might object to a mafia informant working with NYPD assets. Greco arrived at the Staten Island facility on a Monday morning in early December, transported in an unmarked federal vehicle and wearing civilian clothes, jeans, work boots, and a heavy jacket appropriate for the warehouse's minimal heating. 4 U.S. Marshals maintained security, establishing positions throughout the building with clear sightlines to the training areas. Captain Mitchell brought Rex from the precinct, the dog alert and suspicious as she led him from the transport vehicle into the unfamiliar environment. The warehouse's interior smelled of concrete dust, old machinery, and the salt water tang that drifted in from the nearby waterway. Rex's nose worked constantly, processing thousands of scent signatures while his eyes scanned for threats and his ears rotated to track footsteps, voices, and the mechanical hum of ventilation systems.